Our protagonist, Hyun, who used to be hired only to act as a human shield, had the opportunity to be contacted by a respected member of the Riders Agency, who offered him the opportunity to join the front line in a dangerous dungeon. Currently, clients prefer riders who are mages over warriors, as they have a greater ability to launch massive attacks. Hyun was immersed in a sea of remorse, regretting not having made the decision to choose the wizard class in that distant time. 11 years ago, when he was admitted to the prestigious academy specialized in training the brave riders, his attitude towards magic was imposing, with a percentage of 97, even higher than the best wizard of that time, who did not reach more than 92. However, he chose the warrior class in a time when things were different and wizards were seen as mere supports. His need for money forced him to accept his decision. With a voice filled with nostalgia, he promised to meet him the next day in the dark and dangerous dungeon. The next day, the brave riders gathered at the doors of the dungeon, with the hope of finding immense wealth and fortune, but always with the precaution of being alert to any possible tragedy. Hyun noticed the absence of his companion Wooming, but at that moment, an old acquaintance, Myung-ho, greeted him with a cordial smile. Both were warriors and decided to celebrate together with some glasses of wine. After finishing their arduous work, the announcements that the raid was about to begin were heard. Before venturing into the dungeon, the protagonist, following his traditional custom, took in his hands a photograph of his beloved mother, giving him strength to face what was coming. Once they had ventured into the dark and gloomy dungeon, a huge wave of the undead attacked the brave group. A mage ordered the warriors to block the attacks with their lives if necessary, while they casted powerful spells from the safety of the rear line. The undead were defeated, and Hyung realized that his companions were members of the Gold Planet, a guild of wizards that had recently gained much popularity. After a brief rest, the raiders were preparing to face the dungeon boss. Not one asked the protagonist if he had obtained any valuable item, but Hyung noticed an error in the system when trying to reconnect. At that moment, an unknown presence told him to follow the light. The protagonist, curious, decided to follow the mysterious trail of light, telling his companion that he would be back in a moment. 20 years ago, a giant tree suddenly sprouted in the vast Pacific Ocean. Some people believed it was a sign of the end of humanity, while others took it as a divine blessing. This tree, called Yggrasil, belonged to Norse mythology. After its appearance, monsters began to appear around the world, and much of humanity was devastated. However, at that moment of despair, the first awakened appeared, a man capable of using the power of the gods. Over time, more awakened emerged, some of them dedicating themselves to hunting monsters, whom we now know as riders. The AESIR system is a weapon with which humanity has prospered, so its failure could be something negative. After a while, the protagonist finds himself in front of a treasure door, which are hidden rooms that appear very rarely and contain special items that are usually sold for thousands of dollars. Upon entering, he finds an object on a pedestal, which turns out to be the lost Eye of Odin, the only mythical object in the world, and gives the user the ability called universal derivation, which allows them to destroy magic and copy it, storing it in a blank card. The protagonist knows that an object like this could be sold for millions of dollars, so he plans to sell it so he can leave behind the life of a raider and no longer have to continue being a human shield in the dungeons. With this, the protagonist hopes to be able to live a quieter life and away from the danger and adversity that comes with being a raider. The temptation takes hold of the protagonist, and he decides to try the object, even if it's only once. However, he doesn't realize that once equipped, it can't be removed. Fortunately, the system warns him of this and he manages to cancel it, storing it in his inventory and returning with the other raiders. In the dungeons, there are no laws, so announcing that he has found such a valuable object would be like asking to be killed. So he decides to go unnoticed. The raiders are about to enter the boss room, but just at that moment, the ceiling collapses and a poisonous fog spreads throughout the place. One of them, Nai, tells the protagonist they have to leave quickly, but is stabbed in the back, dying in front of the protagonist, who instinctively flees the place. The protagonist concludes that these actions are not those of a monster, but must be treated as dungeon assassins, who probably aim to annihilate the Meteor Guild. A mysterious man appears behind the protagonist, who attacks him with lightning in the form of a chain. The man approaches even more and reveals himself to be Wooming, who warned the protagonist that he would see him in the dungeon. The protagonist asks him why he is doing it, to which Wooming responds that it was a request from his client, as many people hate the Meteor Guild for belittling other guilds. The protagonist wants to take revenge for those who fought alongside him in the front line, but he is aware that he could not against him. because he is a class A mage, so he decides to keep quiet and pretend nothing happened, but Wuming attacks him again. The protagonist doesn't understand why they are also after him and wonders if there is someone who wants him dead. That's when he remembers the dark silhouette of a man. It was his father. He asks who sent him, to which he mockingly responds that he is very intelligent, as that same person ordered his mother's death 5 years ago. The protagonist fills with rage and decides to say goodbye to him forever, but uses the object he found earlier, gaining great magical strength. With a desperation that clung to his soul, Wuming decided to put an end to that powerful enemy once and for all, and with a determined gesture, he furiously threw chains towards the protagonist, with the intention of extinguishing his life in an instant. But Hyam, with an imposing ability and a skill worthy of praise, undid the spell with a disconcerting ease, and a message appears that says that he has a blank card to use, obtaining the ability Chain of Lightning. And with a cold look and an implicit threat in his tone of voice, the enemy warned Wuming that his end would come in the most terrible and unbearable way, promising a death full of suffering. Wuming was stunned to find out that a simple Class D warrior possessed the ability to cast a spell that he himself had dedicated years to learning and perfecting. The protagonist launches his attack and Wuming, desperate, creates a magical shield to protect himself. But the protagonist uses his universal derivation ability, scattering the shield and striking Wuming directly. Wuming pleads for mercy, begging him not to kill him, but the protagonist executes him cold-bloodedly. Afterwards, he loses consciousness gradually, regretting having to die just after getting such a valuable object. Suddenly, a notification appears offering him a new operating system, and that by doing so, he will be sent back to the past to the moment he desires. The protagonist does not understand what is happening, but still accepts the system. Afterwards, he finds himself in front of some Nordic angels who seem to offer him their support. From now on, he is considered the adversary of a seer, and he is given a couple of passive abilities that we will know later. The protagonist wakes up in his room several years younger. He does not understand what is happening, and he questions if it's just a dream. But if it were, he wouldn't want to wake up ever again, since he can see his mother alive. A mission is assigned to him, consisting of resting until he recovers almost completely, and as a reward, he will be given a blank card with which he will be able to copy another ability. The protagonist looks at the date and realizes that it is just before applying to the Writers' Academy, so he decides to become a mage class later. His mother notices that there is something different in him and she worries and asks him if everything is alright. John tells her that he just had a nightmare and then tells her about his change of mind about the class he will choose. This surprises his mother since he was a child he wanted to be a warrior class. But in any case, she supports him in his decision in order to take revenge on his father and trains him until he completes his mission. The protagonist starts planning his abilities. The passive ability of the Observed by the Gods has the effect of increasing all his statistics when leveling up. As for attack abilities, he can currently make do with Chain Lightning. The protagonist plans to give priority to the search for a healing spell, since at that time, although mage riders were underestimated, those with healing abilities were the exception due to their great usefulness and were treated like nobility. The problem is that finding an awakened one with healing abilities would not be easy, but by chance he receives a call from a childhood friend, who later becomes his best friend, and also has the dream of attending the Writers' Academy with the protagonist. But unfortunately she dies. The protagonist suffers when he remembers this, but he decides to change his destiny in this life. She invites him to a conference given by the holy Yu Sung Yoon, who is an awakened possessor of a healing magic called Sacrifice. The protagonist can't miss this opportunity and quickly leaves his house. Meanwhile, in a limousine, Yu Sung Yoon is with her driver Sung-yi, who can't help but worry about the condition of the Holy One, as her Sacrifice ability consumes part of her vital strength, and if she continues at this pace, she could collapse soon. At the conference, both are waiting for the arrival of Yu Sung Yoon, the master of the Yon Hwa Guild and one of the first healing Holy Ones, who would soon fall into a critical condition due to overusing her ability. The Holy One begins her speech by inviting all awakened ones to become riders in order to save innocent people and make the world a better place. This due to a large percentage of awakened ones do not want to fight monsters. Even Yihyun wanted to sell his mythic object to get rid of that burden. After that, friends say goodbye, and the protagonist goes looking for Yu Seung and crosses with Sung-yi, who tells him that the master does not have time to attend fans, but the protagonist interrupts him by saying that he knows about Yu Seung's illness and claims to have the cure for it. Sung-yi is very angry at thinking that the boy is joking, But the master is curious about what he just heard and takes him to her office. She asks him how he plans to cure her, and Yi-hyun, without beating around the bush, tells her that he plans to copy her ability. Sung-yi is again angry at considering it foolish, since sacrifice is the unique ability of Yu-seung, while normal abilities can be memorized. There is no way to learn a unique ability. These are abilities that only one person possesses or that were inherited from their relatives and are even rarer than S-class abilities. Despite this, the protagonist insists that if he couldn't do it, he wouldn't have looked for them. In addition, to cure the penalties of an ability of equal or higher rank is required. And since sacrifice does not allow her to heal herself, she has no choice but to accept it. Yu-seung shows him her ability and the protagonist uses the blank card he had to copy it. After that, the protagonist shows them how he is able to use sacrifice, and both are amazed to witness it, thus beginning the negotiations. The protagonist tells her that in exchange for healing her, she has to become his sponsor, as to grow as a raider, money and connections are needed. She responds that she is willing to accept, but with a condition. The protagonist should join the Yonhwa Guild, as it would be very beneficial to have someone with his qualities in the guild. Besides, she finds him quite attractive. The protagonist prefers to work on his own, but he knows that to truly grow, it is necessary to join a guild, and what better than the Yonhwa Guild, currently number 1. But before making a decision, he tells her that he will heal her first, so he uses his new sacrifice ability, and Yu-seung instantly feels a great improvement in her health. Sung-yi apologizes to the protagonist for the way he treated him before. Yu-seung is completely healed and can't help but be moved to tears. She thanks Yi-hyun and asks him if he is not dissatisfied with receiving the penalty of her ability, not knowing that since it is a copied ability, the penalties do not apply to the protagonist in the same way. The protagonist responds that if that is the case, they should only heal each other. Yu-seung agrees and tells the protagonist that if he needs anything, he only has to ask, to which the protagonist quickly says that there is something he would like to ask for the next day. Sung-yi takes the protagonist to the place he requested, a low-rank dungeon belonging to the Yonhwa Guild, in order to train to level up before entering the Millie's Academy and competing against the best raiders. Continuing from where we left off in the previous chapter, Yi-hyun and Sung-yi are in front of the dungeon property of the guild. Sung-yi gives the protagonist a staff and warns him that despite being a low-rank dungeon, it is dangerous to enter alone, so he asks him if he is sure he wants to do it. The protagonist responds that his intention is to level up, so it will be better if he does it alone. Being so, Sung-yi gives him a stone that he can break to return to the guild in case of danger, and tells him to take it as an apology for having been rude to him before. The protagonist thanks him and proceeds to enter the dungeon, but as he puts his foot inside, he is surrounded by shadows, and the Nornir system transports him to a new area, specifically to Helheim, the land of the dead. Meanwhile, Yu-seung is curious about the protagonist, wondering if he will be able to clear a dungeon alone. Hana, one of her assistants, hands her some documents with the profile of Yi-hyun. Yu-seung is impressed to see that the protagonist had requested the warrior class, but is even more impressed by the high percentage of aptitude he has as a mage. So she calls Sung-yi and asks him to take the protagonist to a meeting when he returns from the dungeon because she wants to personally check the talent this person possesses. Meanwhile, Yi-hyun is in a place similar to a cemetery and is attacked by a skeleton archer who manages to graze him with one of his paralyzing venom arrows. The protagonist quickly heals himself with the sacrifice ability, and more enemies continue to emerge, surrounding him completely. On the other hand, Yujin is in her room, very upset with the protagonist for leaving her alone on the day of Yu-seung's conference. She also can't help but worry about her friend who changed so much overnight. This causes unconscious shivers in Yi-hyun, who thinks this is due to being surrounded by several spectral monsters. The protagonist takes out the staff they were given earlier and proceeds to fight against the enemies. But due to his lack of experience as a mage and being so accustomed to fighting with a sword, he ends up breaking the staff. Fortunately, he is in Helheim, the land of the dead governed by Hel, the daughter of Loki, a place where those who were murdered would come back to life as undead, which was perfect for his new ability, which when used on undead changes the healing ability for a powerful area attack. Ji-hyun doesn't hesitate to use it and easily defeats all the undead. The protagonist plans to use the stone that Sung-yi gave him to return to base, but at that moment he feels a terrifying presence behind him. When he turns around, he can't see anything but is suffocated by the strong pressure of that presence, which prevents him from moving. So he self-injures himself to regain consciousness and flee the place, but he is quickly caught by a huge shadow, which was the boss of the dungeon. Yi-hyun instantly feels the difference in power between the two, so he proceeds to take the stone out of his inventory, but is heavily struck by the nocturnal shadow, dropping the stone and becoming severely injured. The boss stands in front of him and subsequently attacks the protagonist with the intention of finishing him off. Yi-hyun recognizes that he is unable to dodge that attack, so he has no other option but to accept his death. But surprisingly, the shadow's movements stop just before impacting the protagonist. A female voice is heard, telling the monster to stop, as that boy is a special guest that she herself brought to that place. It is revealed that it is Hell, the ruler of the land of the dead. She approaches the protagonist and can't believe that someone so young as the Chosen One is the adversary of the Aesir. But she likes the look in his eyes and tells the protagonist that he has to become stronger quickly, as the end is approaching. Otherwise she will be the one to kill him with her own hands, since he is a very important pawn for them. She decides to give him another chance and gives him 2 months to become stronger and defeat the nocturnal shadow before that time. At that moment, a new main mission is assigned to him, and as a reward for completing it, Hell will give him a special gift. But the penalty for failing will be death. Hell leaves, telling the protagonist that she is eager to see his evolution, and that she will pray that he is successful in his mission. After that, Yi-hyun wakes up outside the dungeon with his wounds completely healed. Seeing the mission, he realizes that it was not just a dream, so one thing is for sure. He has to become stronger so that he does not have to suffer the wrath of the goddess Hell. In addition, it seems positive to have a short-term goal to achieve, so he has to start getting used to fighting as a mage and not as a warrior. At that moment, he receives messages from Sunyi telling him that Yoosung is interested in talking to him in person to finalize the contract with the guild. The next day, Sunyi guides him to where the guild master is, who is very excited to see the protagonist again and tells him that she has been waiting for him. Yi-hyun greets her and they begin to talk about the contract. The protagonist says that he has a condition to add, which is that she herself teach him about magic, helping him to familiarize himself with the correct way of casting spells. Yoosung thinks it's an interesting proposal, but before that, she needs to test his talent, so she puts the condition of submitting him to a test known as the Mana Cube. The protagonist thinks it's a quite challenging test, since only 7% of awakened mages have been able to pass this test. However, Yoosung tells him that even if he fails, the contract remains in place. After all, she is only interested in seeing Yi-hyun's potential. Sunyi begins the preparations, and the protagonist proceeds to enter the cube. Sunyi tells the master that he can't help but worry, since even though he recognizes Yi-hyun's talent, he is still just a child. However, Yoosung is completely convinced that he will be able to do it. Inside the cube, Yi-hyun finds himself in a deep ocean made of mana. He can breathe without problems, but he worries about contracting the mana addiction disease, which is caused by being exposed to highly concentrated mana for a prolonged period of time, and in extreme cases, it could even cause death. So the priority is to find a way out among all those mana eddies. The protagonist concentrates to feel the waves, and at that moment, he perceives a different current, so he follows that path and finds a crystal that contained an overwhelming amount of mana. Meanwhile, outside the cube, Sunyi asks Yoosung how long the protagonist will take to get out of there. Yoosung responds that she was the fastest in the country, completing the test in just 40 minutes. Both agree that there can only be 2 possible outcomes. Either the protagonist will not be able to overcome the cube, or he will create a new record by surpassing the clan master at that time. They observe something that leaves them surprised. The cube begins to crack. Incredulous at what they saw, Sunyi checks the timer and realizes that only 10 minutes have passed since the protagonist entered the cube. The cracks are due to the fact that what Yi-hyun found was the core of the cube, so by breaking it, he destabilized it and completed the test in just 10 minutes, a time that far surpasses the current record belonging to a mage named Camilla, who had broken the cube in 36 minutes. Yoosung and Sunyi are shocked by such an accomplishment and congratulate him with enthusiasm. Yoosung asks him how he managed to break the cube so quickly, and he explains that he simply broke the crystal that was in the cube, which surprises her, as this means that Yi-hyun's mana exceeds all the mana that was inside the cube. With this done, Yoosung promises to make the protagonist the best mage and officially welcomes him to the Yonhwa Guild. Later, Yoojun, along with the protagonist's mother, meets him outside his house and is surprised to see him arrive in a luxurious car. Moments later, in the protagonist's room, Yoojun questions him about his sudden decision to change classes. But since he can't tell her that things will change in the future in favor of the mages, he changes the subject and asks him how it is possible that he spends more time there than at his own house. This is because Yoojun comes from a quite influential family. His parents are dedicated to dismantling monster corpses, so they are constantly traveling to different countries. As a result, there are many times when Yujin is alone at home, so her parents prefer to leave her in charge at Yihyun's house. The protagonist takes advantage of this and asks her to teach him some magic theory, to which the girl agrees on the condition of fulfilling a wish in the future. The friends spend a good quality time together and the protagonist seems quite content. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, a man surrounded by crows was hunting some beasts. It is none other than Min Seong-o, the protagonist's father. One of his companions praises him, saying that thanks to him, they were able to complete the dungeon without problems. The man invites him to join his guild, but Seong-o tells him that he has no intention of joining any guild. Despite this, the man insists greedily that he join, which annoys the protagonist's father, as humans seem to him a vulgar and greedy species. Nevertheless, he spares the man's life and leaves the place, erasing his memories in some way. Yihyun and Yoo-seung are about to start their first magic lesson, but before that, she asks him to show her his abilities in a practice battle. She begins by asking him to try to attack her. The protagonist prepares and takes a specific warrior's stance. Yihyun throws the first punch, but Yoo-seung easily blocks it. The protagonist steps back, surprised because despite being a healer, his master is quite strong. After all, she is a S-rank raider. Yoo-seung tells him that he should leave behind his warrior habits, as the main difference between the two classes is the ability to fight at long range when being a mage. If he continues to fight at short range against his opponents, he will fall quickly due to his low defense. Yoo-seung decides to get serious to teach him how real mages fight, and tells him not to worry because if he gets hurt, she will heal him herself. Without further ado, she launches a spell at the protagonist, who barely manages to dodge it. After that, he responds with a chain of lightning. The protagonist believes that he hit Yoo-seung directly, but the reality is that she moved so fast that when the protagonist realized it, it was too late, and he received the full attack of his master. Fortunately, he manages to resist it pretty well. Yoo-seung then launches an even stronger attack. Yihyun uses universal divergence and destroys the girl's spell. He then tries an attack by summoning one of his chains from the ground, but Yoo-seung manages to block it thanks to her high reflexes. Even so, she is impressed that a beginner mage like him is capable of having so much magical power. Yihyun starts to run out of mana, so Yoo-seung takes advantage of this and with a quick movement, knocks down the protagonist who ends up lying on the ground not knowing what just happened. Yoo-seung asks him sarcastically if he thought he would win and then helps him get up. The protagonist stays thinking about the huge difference between him and a S-rank raider, but Yoo-seung tells him that he did quite well, and that by observing him, she realized that Yihyun has the potential to learn a fighting style that no one else has managed to achieve. So officially, she congratulates him for becoming her first apprentice. Back at home, Yihyun was still thinking about this while he was studying the types of magic with Yujin. Yujin complains that while other mages, including her, take months to learn a spell, the protagonist only needs a couple of days. Yihyun responds that that's why he decided to change classes, but he manages to see a memory of his father who whispered something to him and wonders if he really chose that path by his own will. This leaves him distracted, wondering if it was just his imagination. But he can't afford to waste time, so he starts thinking about something more productive. He remembers that in the future there is a precious pill that promises to be of great help to raiders all over the world, so he marks it as his new goal. Meanwhile, Seung-yi asks the master if she really believes that the protagonist is capable of learning the fighting style she talked about. She responds that she has no doubt and is convinced that if in the future another S-rank mage appears, it will be Yihyun. Going back to, the protagonist's goal is to obtain a mana increase pill, a highly coveted object among mages that permanently increases the mana of the awakened. The pill would not be invented for another 5 years, so the protagonist decides to go to Plan B, which consists of personally meeting alchemist Lee Yi-seng, who would have invented the pill. The protagonist quickly heads to the Millie's Academy, where the alchemist boy should currently be. There, he realizes that a group of people were watching as a boy was being bullied by others. The protagonist intervenes determined to interrupt the fight and realizes that the boy being bullied was Lee Yi-seng, whom he was looking for to make the mana increase pill. Hyung is in a tense situation with a bully who has threatened him, but he decides to completely ignore him and suggests to the boy who is being bullied that they go to the nurse's office together. This enrages the bully, who grabs him by the neck. Hyung defends himself by putting into practice the magic theory learned with his friend Jujai and his combat skills learned with his teacher. He uses a sacred arrow against the bully, leaving him quite affected. The bully, worried about his reputation, pulls out a sword from his inventory and aims directly at Hyung's head. However, Hyung remembers one of his teacher's teachings, which consists of creating a shield around his body with mana, easily blocking the attack. Taking advantage of this situation, Hyung grabs the bully by the face and with an intimidating face tells him that he shouldn't have messed with him, ending him with another sacred arrow directly to his face, leaving him unconscious. After defeating the bully, Hyung is surprised at how easily he did it. He recognizes that he may have been a bit drastic, so he takes out an item from his inventory, a healing potion, and uses it to heal the bully's wounds almost instantly. After this, Hyun insists on taking the boy, Lee Yiseng, to the nurse's office. However, on the way, Hyun realizes that the true intention is to take him to a place where nobody can hear them. Lee Yiseng realizes that Hyun knows who he is and the talent he possesses and wonders if his father sent him to find him. Hyun makes it clear to him that nobody sent him and that he just has a favor to ask, specifically to make a certain pill for him. Hyun confesses to Lee Yiseng that he knows that he was the one who fabricated and sold the healing potion on the black market, and that he possesses a great knowledge of alchemy. Jiseng is surprised as it is impossible for him to have tracked him through the black market, as it is a transaction system that completely hides the identity of sellers. Despite denying it, it was obvious that Jiseng was lying, as if his father found out about something like that, he would surely end up dead. Hyung reassures him by saying that he just needs a good alchemist who is capable of making the elixirs they need. Jiseng starts to have a little more confidence in Hyung and tells him that he will hear his proposal later in the blood room. Hyung mentions that it is a pill that increases a person's mana permanently, which surprises Jiseng, as it seems very strange that something like that is possible. Hyung, upon realizing that he would invent the mana increase pill in the future, begins to think about possible ingredients based on the desired effect. As time passes, the protagonist continues to train with his teacher Joseon, who recognizes that he has improved quite a bit as a mage, even mastering his barrier. However, when they are about to get even more serious in battle, Joseon stops them and tells them that it was enough training for today, although the reality was that if she hadn't stopped them, the training room would have been destroyed. Joseon congratulates him for his progress and asks him about what he has been studying in theory about magic. Hyung tells her that his friend Jujun has been helping him with that. Joseon is happy about this, as she was worried because she hadn't been able to help him with that. After that, she tells him that with his current abilities he won't have any problems with the E-rank dungeons, not knowing that the last time he faced a C-rank boss. Later, we see Jisung looking quite tired but with the perfectly made pill in his hands. Hyung thanks him for working so hard and proceeds to consume the pill, which instantly increases his magical statistic considerably. Surprised by the incredible effect it had and glad that he went to Sanger, as if he had taken the ingredients to any other alchemist, the pill would not have had the same effect. Finally, after several battles with monsters and overcoming various obstacles, the protagonist manages to find and defeat the Shadow of the Night, thus fulfilling his goal. With his new battle style and the mana increase pill, he is ready to face any challenge that may arise in the future. With the mission accomplished, the protagonist meets Jel again, who congratulates him for his achievement and asks him about his plans for the future. It is clear that the protagonist has many ideas in mind and a great desire to continue advancing in his path as a mage. Meanwhile, Sungyi, who was supervising outside the dungeon, feels a strange presence approaching the place. This seems strange to him, as the report said that no one from his party would be there. Therefore, he pulls out a weapon and a car approaches. A worker from a neighboring guild named Yusun gets out of it. Sungyi puts away his weapon and asks her why she is there. She tells him it is for work-related matters and also because she wanted to see him. However, he doesn't believe the latter, as they were university classmates and she had never contacted him since graduation. Sungyi goes straight to the point and asks her if the rumor is true that the teacher Yusun is sick. She tells him that it's obviously just a rumor and asks him where he heard that from. He tells her that he has many contacts, indicating that the Uter Guild has hired spies to infiltrate the Lotus Guild. He thanks her for letting him know before she leaves. He mentions that he has one more question and asks if by chance she knows the boy in the photo, and the reason why he frequently goes to the Lotus Guild building, often encountering the representative of the Sun Guild. She refuses to give him the information, saying that it is not the concern of a member of another guild. Similarly, John did not expect her to tell him this, so he bids her farewell and leaves the place. Meanwhile, he is sitting on a pile of dead enemies when suddenly the dungeon boss appears. The protagonist receives a sacred arrow in the face, saying that he is glad to see him again and that this time things will be different. This enraged the monster, who quickly attacks the protagonist, but he easily evades it, while continuing to attack with his sacred arrows. The dark shadow continues to attack wildly, but surprisingly the protagonist had no problem dodging its attacks. This makes the boss nervous, who realizes that the protagonist was about to launch his chains, managing to deflect them. However, the protagonist changes the direction of his chains and manages to tie up his enemy, leaving him completely immobile and unable to dodge a rain of sacred arrows. This gravely affects the boss, who then breaks the chains and emits a powerful energy. This is because the monster had entered a new phase called Berserker, greatly increasing both his dexterity and strength. If that were not enough, the protagonist receives a curse which consisted of dying suddenly if he did not fulfill the condition to remove it, which was to defeat the Shadow of the Night. Finally, after several confrontations with monsters and overcoming various obstacles, the protagonist manages to find and defeat the Shadow Knight, fulfilling his objective. With his new battle style and the mana increase potion, at that moment, he realizes that what is happening is the work of Gel, yelling that it is not fair for it to interfere in that way. And since he has no other option, he heads towards the dungeon boss with the intention of killing him as soon as possible. However, instead of fighting against him, the boss flees from him, realizing that by simply prolonging the fight, the protagonist would die. Jill notices that he is causing this, so in order to quickly finish him off, he needs to use his highest area of attack ability, which is Judgment of Light. But before he can launch it, Night Shadow uses his ability, which leaves the protagonist under the penalty of fear, making him immobile until he receives some kind of blow. The monster takes advantage of this to strike a powerful blow at the protagonist, who suffers quite a bit from this attack but in turn manages to dispel the fear. The protagonist starts to think about how to defeat him, realizing that by cutting him off, he will be unable to flee again. So he activates a skill called Wind Impulse, which greatly increases his speed. The boss retreats seeing this, however, this was part of the protagonist's plan, who throws a blinding bomb directly at the position of the shadow, quickly approaching him. Desperate, the monster lets out a fierce scream calling for undead to help him. Fortunately, it was too late as the protagonist activates the Judgment of Light, ending with all of them, including the boss of the dungeon, thus defeating him in the last 5 seconds and getting rid of the curse he had, thus getting the title of the one who defeated the first test. After this, the protagonist receives a message from Gel, who tells him that he now understands why he was chosen and inviting him to his temple. We see how the Mark of Death is undone, and the protagonist gets a large amount of statistics points as well as a couple of pieces of equipment. After that, the protagonist is transported to another place, which is the Temple of Gel.